7. Lair of the Jackal. 30 minutes later they parked the car directly opposite a nursing home that was used exclusively for important detainees of the State Department. It was easy enough to get into, but mighty hard to get out again. Jed Gray followed his chief across the road. They were stopped by the gatekeeper until Zak Biko flipped his warrant card, grinning at the man as he did so. "How long have you known me for what I am, Fred?" The uniformed sergeant shrugged. "Look, Zak, I wouldn't let the president inside these gates unless he had the necessary warrant. You'll find extra men on duty, they're bound to stop you before you get to the reception desk." Zak and Jed walked up the short drive and disappeared into the nursing home. The day staff had just come on duty and the sister in charge greeted Zak Biko as he stepped from the lift on the first floor where the nameless boy still lay in a coma. Jed Gray had remained in the hall, watchful and very alert. "Colonel Jones phoned personally to say that you were on your way, Mr. Biko." The sister indicated the two uniformed policemen standing in the passage. Several white-painted doors indicated that this was the private room department of the nursing home. "The surgeon, Mr. Hamilton, is still here and is on call, sir. We are doing all we can for the young man." "How old would you say he was, sister?" asked Zak. "Not more than 17, I'd say." "Has he been on drugs?" Zak asked the question knowing the sister would have some ideas by now, but she shook her head. "Not drugs, I think, Mr. Biko. He's been under some kind of tension, though. The shock is what's causing the deep coma. Mr. Hamilton thinks the same. It's only a shoulder wound. Not much damage. He should recover from that, but the boy was in a shocked state before the bullet reached him. There was a great loss of blood, the prognosis isn't good." She bustled away, full of starch and medical knowledge. The department only picked the best to attend to this particular nursing home. Zak greeted the police guards, showing his own warrant card as a matter of course, and went in. The room was painted white, but the curtains and bed cover were of a cheerful chintz. Nothing in this sick room suggested that the inmate was in any way of criminal persuasion. By the bedside, an elderly nurse was keeping watch. The boy in the bed was whiter than the spotless bed linen. The far corner was occupied by a plainclothes policeman and, beside the window, his partner on duty watched the passing scene down below in the street. Colonel Jones had placed his men strategically. For a long moment, Zak Biko stood by the end of the bed deep in thoughts of his own. The words of the gang leader regarding this patient came back to him: "If the boy doesn't die through natural causes, he'll die by my orders before morning." Zak allowed himself to think back over the events of the night. Was the ball in their court still, or had he won that round? The carnage at the Harvey home had to be considered, but who had been wiped out? Only 3 underlings and hired gunmen were still easily available. The girl, Linda Harvey, who should have been minus a finger and wasn't. She could mean anything or nothing to the head hoodlum who had been using the countrywide chain stores belonging to the Harvey group for the purpose of distributing his evil wares. The question was now, was Linda Harvey important, or not? Zak rather thought she was. The boy on the bed lay like one dead already. The plainclothes policeman remained quietly watchful, and the nurse never took her eyes away from her unconscious patient. There was so much to do, and so little time to do it in. Zak sighed softly. Where did Tom Larning, the man with whom Linda Harvey was supposed to be having an affair, fit in? He was the man for whom the girl had braved her uncle's fury. The newspapers had not been quiet about the murder of Franklin Harvey, yet this Tom Larning had not reappeared, not even in the shape of an anxious telephone call to find out if Linda wanted him to be with her. And behind all these unanswered questions was the specter of Jonah. Was it just a man called Jonah who had caused Linda Harvey to collapse? Or was it, as the Kendalls had said, indeed her father, whom the world believed to have died 20 years ago in a French railway crash? Zak signed to the nurse that he wished to take her place. She didn't like it much, but she moved aside. He began to speak quietly. "I'm sorry to worry you, kid. What were you doing in the grounds of the Harvey home? Were you perhaps looking for Jonah? Zak leaned closer to the boy. Jonah. The nurse came forward, anger sparkling in her eyes. Do you want to kill him? He's not in a fit state to be bothered by anyone. She was rattling on, but Zak Biko's eyes never left the boy's face, and he had his reward. The long eyelashes flickered very slightly. Zak placed his hand over the boy's limp fingers. Minutes went by. Nobody spoke. The nurse kept her hand on the bell that would summon the specialist who was still waiting downstairs in case he was needed. The eyelashes fluttered again, and the boy opened his eyes very briefly. Jonah. The whispered word wasn't heard by anyone but Zak Biko. Take it easy, kid. You are among friends now. There's nothing to worry about. Is your name Jonah? The boy stirred but didn't speak. The nurse was frantically summoning help by keeping her thumb on the button. Soon hurrying footsteps approached the door and a white-coated doctor came in. Zak still held the thin hand. He looked up. He spoke. Doc. Just one word. What are the chances now? Zak's glance was anxious. Let me see. The specialist began an examination. After a moment he straightened up and gave some sharply uttered instructions to the nurse. Only then did he turn to Zak Biko. He's coming out of the coma. It's too early to say, but as long as this patient gets complete rest and freedom from any more shocks to his system, he's got a good chance of living. Zak signaled the two men to follow him into the passage. When he had all four together, he told them what to expect. You are to suspect everything and everybody, Zak advised them. Get a stray cat to sample any food or drink that he may be offered. Better still, get two men into the kitchens. What's it all about, Biko? The eldest of the plainclothes policemen asked the question. Who is he? Just a kid who may have been very much sinned against. I'm not sure of my facts. Meanwhile, you guys keep him in good health for me. He turned away. Maybe one day he'll be grateful to you guys. Zak Biko made 2 phone calls then, satisfied that he had done everything in his power to guard the boy from the gang who sought to kill him. He climbed into his car, content to allow Jed Gray to drive him towards the city. The traffic was heavy, and it was early afternoon before the car slid to a halt outside the National Bank buildings in 9th Avenue, just off New York's Broadway. Jed indicated the expensive entrance with its commissionaire and the deep pile carpets which they could see through the revolving doors. It's pretty classy, boss, Jed grinned. They can do anything they want on credit, fly, sail, buy a summer place on Lake Yukon or die, and pay later. Do you want me to come along? Zak grinned. No thanks, Jed. You've done your share. Get along home now. I'll be in touch. He slid out of the car. Keep your eyes open, Jed, and use the back way at home. There might be a reception committee waiting for us with a surprise we wouldn't want. They've got everything except brains, boss. Money, organization, suckers like this Franklin Harvey. Don't fret. The house will be clear of lice when you get back. Jed started the car and seconds later Zak watched it swing into the traffic lane. Then he turned in at the swanky entrance to the National Bank buildings. The reception desk was manned by young women who could only be described as luxurious. They had been well chosen too, Zak thought. There was a blonde, a brunette, and a redhead. He chose the latter. You have a few private apartments in this building? The redhead smiled. Only for gentlemen with overloaded bank rolls. She was something to look at, tall, firm and with a shape to make crooks turn into corpses with shock. I'm looking for one of those. His name is Larning. She moved like a boa constrictor selecting a mouse for supper, but Zak stopped her before she could reach the phone. He flicked his warrant card at her. I'll do my own announcing. The girl smiled. Mr. Larning has a penthouse, sir. Take the right-hand lift to the top. You can't miss it unless you step over the parapet, and that would be a pity. She turned away, leaving Zak to admire her curves and regret her accent. He made for the lift. The penthouse had its own entrance from the lift. Zak pressed the bell and the hand-carved front door slid open immediately. He stepped inside the door and slid it to a close behind him. He found himself in an expensively furnished inner hall. There was a silver-handled chest and an antique mirror over a glittering wall table. The floor had Persian rugs scattered over an off-white, top-quality wall-to-wall carpet. There was a total silence. Even Zak got an attack of goosepimples. It felt as though icy fingers were plucking his spine like a guitar player warming up. His hand found his gun and he moved forward. Zak now knew that he was in the lair of the easy money boys, those who lived by the gun, the thieves, musclemen and hired killers. He wondered how soon they'd kill him and how long Jed Grey would wait for him to return home before asking Colonel Jack Jones to find him, or whatever might be left of him. Zak glanced swiftly around him. There were 3 closed doors leading off the hall. There was also a closed cupboard which was not quite closed. Ignoring his prickling scalp, Zak made a quick inspection, then stepped into the cupboard to wait. Deciding that at last death for him was just around the corner of this hall, he steeled himself to remain motionless. Letting the other guy move first seemed the only way in or out of this mess. The man who came noiselessly into the hall was short, thick, and mean-looking. There was a thin line above his upper lip, no doubt intended as a mustache, and the eyes above it wouldn't have been out of place on a mangy pig. He was obviously a professional killer on his way to work, and Zak Biko was his present assignment. The short man glanced around, then the hand that wasn't holding a gun reached up to mess up what hair he still possessed. Zak Biko watched this performance through a crack in the cupboard door. The short man called softly, "That's funny. There's no one here, boss. Must have got lost or something." The voice that answered him from an adjoining room was that of an educated man who sounded bored to death. "Mr. Zak Biko is inside this penthouse, creeper. Find him before he finds you." Zak shot him in the knee before the short man could carry out his instructions, and his screams brought the college type onto the scene. "Mr. Larning. Sorry about the mess on your Persian rug," said Zak, bending down to pick up the gunman's weapon and putting it in his pocket. He did not take his eyes from the tall man who was now regarding him with less than pleasure. His shoe touched the still yelling man's ribs. "He'll need a doctor. Best call an ambulance, Mr. Larning." "I am Larning." The tall man spoke unconcernedly, as if a shot gunman on his hall floor was something he expected and could do nothing about. "Would you care to join me in a drink?" Zak glanced down at the sweating, swearing gunman. "What about him?" Larning raised well-shaped eyebrows. "He doesn't need a drink." "I understand you wish to talk to me." Zak followed his host into a long room filled with furniture and pictures that cost money, big money. Larning appeared to be alone. He went straight to a well-stocked bar and started pouring drinks. Outside in the hall the injured man moaned pitifully, until Zak's quick hearing detected a scuffling sound and the man screamed once again. After that there was silence. He moved unhurriedly over to the veranda windows which were tightly closed against the increasing cold of the weather. New York would soon be snowbound. "You're lucky to have found me at home." Larning carried 2 glasses towards his guest. "Another half hour and I'd have been heading back to Los Angeles where I have a place." Zak accepted the drink. "Too bad I have to detain you, Larning. I understand you've been seeing a lot of Linda Harvey, without Franklin's knowledge or permission. Is that right?" Larning laughed. "Something like that. Now Franklin's dead, Linda can move around as she wants. Have you got any objections?" Zak smiled. "My name's Zak Biko, Larning. Who said it wasn't? I'm preparing for a real roundup of dope peddling crooks. That includes you." There was silence that lasted until Larning finished his current drink. "Dope? Not me, brother. Are you thinking that Miss Harvey is a gang member or something? What I think doesn't concern you, Larning. You knew I was on the way up here. You advised that gunman, Creeper, I think you called him, to get me before I got him. Zak grinned at the memory. Too bad you both miscalculated. Larning turned back towards the bar. It hardly matters now. It has been decided that you are getting too close to our source of income. Let's put it that way, Biko. Look, Larning. Don't play the big boss with me. You're an underling. I'm after the guys who are responsible for running and organizing the thugs known as the Black Gang. Maybe you can tell me. Larning still looked undisturbed, even bored. Maybe I could, but I shan't do so, Biko. If I told you and then shot you into your grave, the story wouldn't do you any good. If I did satisfy your curiosity and you did manage to get out of here alive, that wouldn't do me any good. Check. Zak looked at him without expression. There is only one thing you could tell me, Larning, even then I think I can guess the answer. Zak mentally hugged himself. The right angle to all this Harvey business had suddenly hit him, but outwardly he showed no sign. Larning walked towards his guest. As sure as hell, Biko, America will sleep better when you're sleeping for good. What can you guess? Zak tensed his muscles as Larning came within arm's reach. All that lovely money, Larning. I found it in Franklin Harvey's study safe. It was a safe a child could have opened with a tin opener. Larning came a little closer. I doubt if any child could have found it in the first place, Copper. Where's the cash now? Zak smiled. Somewhere safer than where it was found. You'll have to get it knocked off your tax assessment. His arm shot out while he was speaking and in a second Zak had Larning in a cruel grip. Larning began to squeal with the pain of a broken arm. Zak Biko's right hand held his gun. Relentlessly he pushed his victim towards the hall beyond the living room, but already there were voices out there. Larning used his feet, but Zak had been expecting that move and his shin was somewhere else when Larning's heel tried to make contact. Pushing Larning's face against the wall beside the door, Zak used the crack to take a look. He wasn't taking any chances. Larning might be useful as a shield, but then again, he might be disposable like Franklin Harvey had been. Through the crack, Zak could see a thin mean-faced individual holding a .45 revolver in his hand. How many more were lurking around in Tom Larning's swanky penthouse home? Zak decided not to take chances. He pushed Larning suddenly to the floor. The gangster fell heavily on his injured arm. Zak moved at a crouch from the living room, firing as he went. The mean-faced man went down before the detective's gun, making his passage to the front entrance possible. Seconds later he was in the outer hall. The lift stood waiting, but so did two other guys, both of them were there to see he didn't use it. Zak's gun barked twice before a stray bullet winged him. He raced for the lift. He didn't see the thug who was crouched inside the gilded lift, but he knew he was there when a fist let fly at his neck like the kick of an ostrich. It knocked him sideways just as a steel-capped shoe sent his gun flying out of reach. Quickly recovering, Zak sailed into his attacker. With his left hand he used a karate chop to break the man's collarbone. When he heard it crack, the thug let out a roar of pain and Zak slid across the floor to regain his own gun. Without waiting for more, the detective made it back to the lift. His lungs were making heavy weather of their function by this time. The luxurious lift finally carried him back down to the grand entrance of the National Bank buildings and the possible assistance of a passing patrol car.